God speaks to me and he says, I want you to pull equity from your home and put it into this one project. And I watched it go 100x in 2 years. And so for every $10,000 I'd put in, God multiplied it to $1 million.
What do you think success for you is?
Until I get there, I won't feel like I have success. I won't feel like I am accomplished and fulfilled in life. Sometimes God shows you the destination. Other times he just shows you the next step, but he never shows you both.
Someone may hear this and say, wow, you're just so lucky. Like,
luck, huh?
All right, Vlad, thank you so much for coming on. So the goal with this podcast is to talk about principles for success and meaningful growth. And I kind of want to break down the conversation in for like two different audiences. So one audience is maybe someone who is trying to figure out where they want to go in life. They still haven't figured out. They're young and trying to understand how to find their way, their purpose in life. And then for the other part of the conversation is maybe someone who has already a business, they're running a business, maybe have a family, and they just want to know a little more about what actually works to be successful, what kind of principles that's not just theory, but in practice, right? So what I want to start this conversation with is first you introduce yourself, who you are, and answer this question. What does success look like for you, and how did you come to that understanding?
Definitely assimilate myself with those both sides of the individuals that you said would find interest in something like this. I've been on both sides of that scale, and my name's Vlad. I am what would you call it, trivocational or whatever at this point. I'm a father, I'm a pastor, right? I'm a business owner, and everything in between. And so a lot of different caps that I wear in life. It almost seem like you got to wear, all of them at the same time, simultaneously, and just flip through here and there. And so just juggling between everything and trying to find this magical place of, that everybody's trying to get to, called balance. And I personally don't believe that exists at this point. I think I've lost hope in something like that. But that's kind of what I do. I'm an associate pastor at a church called Light of the Gospel. I've been doing that for a while. I've been ordained for about 5 years. Big story behind kind of how I even got positioned in that. It was about 8 years ago. I completely pivoted my life. Just God redirected me, and I ended up leaving a doctoral program where I was going to be a physical therapist. And so I have about 6 years of college education under my belt, and I have a bachelor's degree I have never used. It just looks nice on my wall in kinesiology, the study of the movement of the human body, and was one of 32 students that got accepted into a program at Sac State that had almost 1,000 applicants, right? And so in the moments like that, I said, well, this is God's plan for me, because he's opened up this door, and the second semester in, we're approaching midterms, and it's time to, hit the books and study. And God just speaks to me and more or less, for lack of a better word, wrecks me in a service and just says, I have a completely different plan for your life, and this is time for a pivot. And so it was a direction that I wasn't expecting to go, and inside of me, it was as if a dream just instantly died. And I was expecting to be a physical therapist, and was about 2.5 years away from getting not just my degree, but officially credentialed and so forth and licensed. And I was going to, open up my own practice at some point and minister to my patients. And God just completely changed my perspective on life. And I knew that I wanted to, at some point, go into more full-time ministry. And that direction I was going was not going to allow me the freedom to be able to do what I wanted to do in the kingdom of God. And so that's a whole backstory that we can deep dive into.
So that just happened like at that one service?
Correct. Yes.
Were you already like unsure or unhappy or seeking kind of that direction, or no?
Well, I was involved in ministry.
Okay.
I was already, preaching at that time. I was involved with our young adults ministry. I was involved in evangelism. I had started a class at our church for young people that were interested, and I'd take them out to the mall, and we'd go and pray for people, and they would get, healed in the middle of Galleria Mall, and we'd share the gospel with them. And I would teach them on how to share the gospel with people from different religions and walks of life. I experienced a lot of that at school, right, with whether it's students and my cohort and teachers and stuff like that. Intentionally, just speaking with people in the public places of school and just sharing with them about my walk with the Lord. I did a little bit of missions abroad, mainly in Mexico, close to the border, and so that was something I was definitely passionate about. And so God was already doing something, and school, in my opinion, positioned me largely for what I do now as a pastor as well. But yes, more or less, it was an instantaneous moment. George the Viduk, if you know who he is, right, man of God. He was at our youth service, and it was just a Thursday night, and he came and said, this message I didn't plan to preach. It was something that God put on my heart as I was driving here and told me to completely change my topic. And he started talking about the call of God and did an altar call. And right there in the pews, God just, his presence came on me, his glory on my life. And I knew that I knew that I knew that that decision was already made in my heart, and I came home and shared with my wife, and she was, shocked at first, but said, hey, whatever you decide to do, I'm going to support you. And then I had to, talk with my the dean of the school, and he said, "You're crazy. I've never had a student do this before. There are students that dream of being in this position that you're in, and now you're just, up and leaving." And so I had to, share with my classmates and my parents. My dad was funding my way through school at that time, and that wasn't easy to just drop all that tuition money out the
Wow.
door. And but thank God everything kind of came into alignment, and I went into bookkeeping for the family business as a part-time job, moved to Roseville to get closer to church, and that just opened up a lot of different doors that God led me through, and it's been an amazing journey. It's there are a lot of unknowns with the Lord, and you just kind of submit to it and trust and
Trust,
have
yeah.
faith that He's going to take you to the place that's in your best interest, whether you know it or not in that moment. And so that's kind of a little bit of my background. From that pivot when I decided to leave school, like I said, I moved to Roseville, just tried to get more involved in ministry, and God got me into cryptocurrency after that. And this was in 2018, right? You're laughing. In 2018, and that was a crazy journey. It's been a crazy journey, and I mean, it led to so many different things. I don't know how deep you want me to go into this stuff, but
Well,
um,
it sounds like a fascinating story. So I want to
yeah,
hear the
yeah.
cryptocurrency story.
It was late 2017, Christmas. My brother comes to the table and says, "Hey, I found this project called Chainlink." He said, "I really believe in it." This was the peak of the previous, not last bull market, but the one prior. Bitcoin had just hit $20,000, and people were just now discovering what Bitcoin even was. And so he said, "I found this project." We said, "Okay, let's do it." And so I put my first $8,000 in, and I watched it go to about $2,000 by the end of 2018. Right, and didn't know what I was doing, didn't know the space I was in, and in that process, we this transition had happened from my pivoting from school into the bookkeeping side of things, which I was now doing, and we moved to Roseville, and my dad had helped us get our first house. And in 2019, late quarter one, God speaks to me and He says, "I want you to pull equity from your home and put it into this one project." And that was the one my brother had brought to the table. And again, I had that gut feeling, and I knew this was from the Lord. I didn't tell anybody. My wife, thankfully supported me in that. And I opened up a line of equity, and I put about quite a bit of money into one project in 2018.
So when you say
Um,
project, what exactly do you
one
mean?
coin, one
Okay.
cryptocurrency
Okay.
company,
Mm-hmm.
that one token. And so I bought a bunch of Chainlink, and I watched it go 100x in 2 years. And so for every $10,000 I'd put in, God multiplied it to 1 million. It was just the craziest, wildest thing, to experience. And in the process, I tried to get as many people as I could into this. Chainlink was between $2 to $5, and I was telling everybody I could. I said, "Hey, look, I have enough. You buy it, I'll match you, and I'll give you free, And because nobody knew what cryptocurrency was,
Mm-hmm.
and so in 21 when everything just took off, it was but this was a moment when I was not in business. I was in bookkeeping. I understood the back end of things, a little bit about taxes and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, and numbers in terms of how to summarize the numbers that were already present, but not in terms of how to grow a business, how to work with employees, how to hire people, right? Those types of things. I had no idea. I didn't even, understand how to make money. I could understand how to, maybe deal with it, or how to break down where it went and what it did,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily how to accumulate it and to build a business that, would bring that revenue in. And so when I saw this, crazy amount of wealth, and you're just sitting and looking at your phone, it's just a number. It's not in your bank account yet. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a number, and that could change your life. And in 2021, I don't know, we were so involved in the space that I got really carried away with things, and crazy market crashes happened, and it was you'd watch your net worth plummet by 40% overnight, and that could mentally take a toll on you. And so, very stressful years of my life. God just opened up a wild door and multiplied things, and that led me into various places. I went into depression for about 2-3 months in 2021. Good friend of mine, came alongside me. I'd meet with him practically weekly. Still had an insane amount of funds, but it was the thought of, did I, miss the voice of God somewhere? Should I have exited here or there? If I had done this, I would have had this. A lot of that going through the mind and just beating yourself up because you didn't make the right decision, the right call. And so that led into those types of things. I've exited a good amount from the market. I do have an appreciation for the market, despite what many people might say about it. I think there's an immense amount of opportunity, but it comes with a very high risk. And so my risk tolerance is very high because of the fact that I was in that market. I saw what God did when I took a big risk, and then He showed up and did His part. And I think risk, when it's from the Lord, is something that is how do I say it? You can confidently move into, because it's not in your control. It's like, I know that this is from the Lord, right? If it wasn't for those confirmations, I would not have been able to pull the trigger on those things. And looking back, people tell me, like, you're crazy. In that moment, I was scared to even tell anybody about what I did, because they would literally tell me I'm crazy. If you're thinking about, going back and making that decision again. That has led me through many things. And in the process, I experienced, ministry during like COVID, ministry when when I'm suffering and when I'm in depression and having to go up and preach and serve people and pray for them and go on missions when you don't feel like things are, going well for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so that all this kind of has led to the last 2 years of my life, which I think is the more of the bulk of what we might be talking about today, is my involvement more so in business. And so it was in February of 24, January of 24, we had a Daniel's fast at our church, which we do 3 weeks of every January. And so we're going through this fast, and I start talking with my dad, who was in the collision repair business for quite some time. Over 30 years, he's been doing this, rebuilding salvages, right? What many of the Slavic community,
Mm-hmm.
do. And so he got into it very early. Back then, the profit margins were much wider. He was making a lot of money in the early 2000s off of this, and built a business off of it, built a commercial shop in 2009, whole backstory with that, and just, scaled as much as he possibly could, had about a team of 8 people, and we're doing at one point about 20 to 25 cars a month, rebuilding these totals that were about 1 to 3 years
Are
old.
they
And so
insurance?
no,
Insurance?
back then it was
No.
just salvages. It was
Okay.
his own cars, buying, rebuilding,
Okay.
remarketing,
Okay.
wholesaling. In 2020 and 21, right when everything shut down, all the dealers that were purchasing from him stopped. They said, "Hey, we're risk off right now." And so we opened up a deal, like an official local retail dealership. We had the licensing for it, the lot space for it, had about 30 to 40 cars, and I became a salesman. And so we were marketing locally, and I was doing test drives with people and started doing financing paperwork for them and everything. And so I kind of experienced that. I was already very, social and stuff because of the ministry side of things, and, preaching and public speaking and everything. So sales kind of tends to come naturally for me at this point, even though in the past I am naturally, I think, extremely introverted. And
Really?
so that's something
Hmm.
that God brought out of me.
Mm.
When I was younger, I didn't want to talk with people, didn't socialize much. I'd almost have to be forced to, introduce myself to a new person. And from, school and public communications classes and evangelism and the ministry and preaching, all that, when the anointing kind of came upon me and that speaking began to come not from me, but from God, I became very comfortable with, introducing myself to new people, socializing, being present, for them, and then teaching also, I
Hmm.
believe, is something that just naturally comes from God. But going back to, 24, we're going through this fast, and my dad goes, "Hey, Vlad, margins are getting really tight on these cars. I don't think we're going to be able to do this much longer." And I was not interested in the salvage market at all. I said, "Hey, Dad, this is your business. Once you're done, we'll kind of shut it down, close the doors, lease out your space, and you can retire off of whatever you have, and you should have no problem." And so there was nobody that he was intending to pass that on to. I wasn't interested. And so he started kind of talking about this, and God did what he's been doing over and over and over in my life, and he opened up a door. We were talking about becoming a Tesla certified shop. Maybe that would bring in a little bit of outside work for us. We can do some repairs. Teslas are very popular. And so I started calling, just cold calling. I called about 10 different shops and just said, "Hey, I'm interested. I'm so and so. We have a shop in this side of town." And I was calling mainly shops that were on the opposite side of town of me, like not the guy down the street. And I just said, "Hey, look, we're interested in getting Tesla certified. We see that you're certified. Maybe you have some time you can answer a few questions for me, right?" And so I reach out. They're like, "Oh, somebody will call you back. I'll let our manager know." And nobody calls. And then the last shop that I call, right, the gentleman picks up, and it's the owner, and it was his son who works with him, and his name was Drew Donovan. And so he picks up the phone. He says, "Hey, come on in. I'll answer any questions you have. I'm happy to help." And so I stopped by, and he spent about 3 hours with me. I just came with my folder and just some random things, didn't really know what I was doing, just like test certification, the requirements, and some kind of tools that you might have to buy for it and whatever. And we have about a 3 hour meeting, and their shop, they were at that time doing about 6 million in gross repairs, pretty sizable shop, had about 20 some employees, and really doing well. That was the model that I felt like we wanted to pursue. They were contracted with a lot of insurance companies, which is kind of a more specific to in the collision industry. There's a difference between an independent shop versus a contracted shop. And so they were contracted. They were also a franchise, so they had all that overhead as well. And he kind of just laid out his playbook for me, right? This was a person in my industry that could quite literally be a competitor, right, of mine, and I could be his competitor someday. And he just laid out his playbook for me, and that opened up a door. I began to pursue that, began to restructure my dad's entire business, and focused on specific aspects in the beginning, like reviews and stuff like that. Let's get our shop photos, get a nice profile online, get a website, and we got our first two jobs by the end of February, I believe. And so from there, we went from 2 to 6 to 8 to 12 to 25, and now we're upwards of 50 to 60 claims a month at our shop.
Is this specifically for Teslas?
No, that's the interesting thing is at the time I was pursuing a certification. To date, I don't have that certification. We're actually not certified with any manufacturer. And it's interesting because I was pursuing that back then, and I actually didn't end up needing it at all.
So you went in the shop, you were thinking this is the goal,
Yeah.
but you learned something else.
He introduced me to the insurance concept altogether,
Oh, okay.
and
So the
so
insurance
we
company.
always knew that insurance repairs were out there. We just didn't know how to get the customer, how to work with the insurance company, how the structure of it all worked, right? And so that's kind of what he laid out for me in the process. He said, "Look, if you go and you start just pursuing this for about a year, right, get some claims in the door, do some repairs, show yourself, let the insurance companies see who you are. When you have a bit of a reputation, they'll come and they'll offer you a contract, and then you can do what we do because we have contracts with this insurance company, that one, and this one, and this one, and we have a Tesla certification that brings a lot of Teslas in the door for them, right?" And so that's what I thought I was doing. I said, "Hey, for the next year, I just got to kind of set things up, get some customers in the door, do a couple claims, work on the processes, and then when they see us, they'll offer us, a contract, and that's when we can bring in more serious volumes." and so forth. And so I worked with Drew closely for quite some time. He always picked up my calls, answered any of my questions. I really appreciate, and even to this date, we have that interaction. I spoke with him earlier today, offered a job to him that we weren't able to do at our shop, and so forth. So we have this kind of back and forth, and that opened up an entire new door, right? And that's where I got just kind of immersed in the business world. Since then, my dad has entrusted to me the business entirely. We've grown to, I think this year we'll be pushing upwards of over 3 million in gross repairs for this year. And I think the cap for our shop, for this particular shop, will be probably close to about 4.5, 5 million. And so we're approaching that. That's my goal, to get us there and build the systems out and the team for it. And we're already looking into additional locations. And so we're trying to scale the shop. And similarly, about a month or two later, Pastor Alexander shows up, at our shop, and he's getting his car fixed at our shop. So he and my dad kind of knew each other a little bit. And he says, "Hey, I came across Arctic Elevation. I'm opening a location. Maybe you're interested." And so that sparked our interest, and that opened up an entirely new door. And so now, January, February will make our 2-year anniversary since I kind of started on this Relux collision journey. And it's just amazing how far God has gotten us, honestly.
Let me ask you a question, Vlad.
Yeah.
So imagine you're that guy in the shop, and
Mhm.
some young guy comes in and starts asking you like these kind of questions with a folder. Like,
Yeah.
do you think that right now you would be able to do the same thing?
the the there's a reason why this question came up, and it's because literally about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, a vendor of ours calls. It's for CCC, our estimating software, and she says, "Vlad, there's a shop down the street from you, maybe a few miles away, and they're interested in our software, and I gave them your number so they can call you." Right? And lo and behold, a few days later, this gentleman's calling, probably sounded Slavic, Russian speaking, and him and his partner are calling together, and they say, "Hey, do you have some time to answer some of our questions?" And I said, "Well, they told me you're calling about the software. I'm happy to answer any questions about the software." They said, "Well, we're not so interested in the software. We actually want to learn how to get into the insurance space." And so this is where I appreciate having somebody like my wife, because she put me in my place. She really put me in check. And I'll tell you why. I'm in we're waiting for my daughter to get out of vocal practice. We're in the car. I'm back and forth on the phones, and the kids are yelling in the back, and I'm on the phone. And so they asked me that question, right? And I go in and I say, "Hey, well, wait a second. They told me you were going to call about the software. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. But if you want to get into the insurance space, this is not a 10-minute conversation. And I probably have 5 other friends that have shops that I haven't even taken the time to sit down with just yet to share. And so they're like, "Oh, yeah, this and that." And so I was a little aggressive with them over the
Mm-hmm.
phone, and my wife is right next to me listening to the whole thing, right? And so, you kind of start off putting the wall up, and then you start answering 1 or 2 to 3 questions. And next thing you know, we kind of, got fairly deep into the conversation. At the end of it, we hang up. They said, "Thank you so much. That was very helpful. We have direction of where we want to go." And my wife looks at me and she goes, "Vlad," she's like, "do you remember when you were on the other side of that call?" And she's like, "Do you think that the way you responded to them is, what you experienced when you were on the other side of that phone call?" And that was just like a stab to the heart. It just really reminded me of where I started. And I often even encourage young people, like they say, "Well, how can I, learn the ropes or get an idea of what to do, what's essential, what I should spend my time on or shouldn't," right? And I tell them, like, find somebody who is in your space that is not your competition, right? Maybe they're in another state, maybe they're in another city, maybe they're 25 miles away from you, like Drew
Mm-hmm.
was, right? And just ask them for help, right? And that way they don't feel like you're their competition. You're not going to get into their market. And some people don't care, right? Some people don't care if you're down the street. They're established. They have their market share. They know what they're doing, and they can continue to grow whether you're getting customers in the door or not. Other people do. And so the best way to set yourself up, I tell them, is find somebody that's not in your market, but doing the same thing, that you're like, "Hey, I want to build a business like that." And that's what I did, and it worked for me. And then here I have somebody that's, contacting me. And so, and they're not necessarily down the street, but they're maybe on the other side of, we're in East Sac, South Sac, Southeast area. They're on the other, other side,
Mm-hmm.
Southwest side of Sacramento. But that was really a reminder for me, and it kind of humbled me. And I'm thankful for my wife because of moments like that. But yeah,
But it's interesting because like you still have to have some sort of boundary or limit, because imagine like they pull up to your shop, right? And they're like, "Hey, Vlad, can we spend, 2 hours right now?" And they're gonna ask you questions, and then maybe in a week they're gonna need few more of your hours, right? So there still has to be some kind of a limit cap. Like remember I had Dima Tupikov on the podcast, and he was telling me about these guys in his company who started picking up some side jobs. He's in the construction industry,
hmm
and then started picking up some side jobs, still working for him. Then started asking questions, borrowing trailer, and then they sort of left. He answered all their questions. He was very helpful in how to get leads, how to get do these jobs and everything. And then he's like, after a month or so, like he hears that they're at his door trying to poach some of his workers, and he's like, okay, this is kind of going too far. But when
yeah,
he was telling that story, I was thinking like, man, like you have to be very patient
hmm
to really open up yourself to people like that. And some people, they're it's business is business. Some people say that, hey, I can be one way here with my family at church, but when it comes to business, I'm brutal, I'm a killer. And
hmm
they're, for them, it's like two different things. Some people don't see it that way. For some people
yeah,
it's like, it doesn't matter whether I'm in business, in church, in family, I'm always the same. I'm consistent with my values and principles.
hmm
So that's a very, very interesting story. So going back to the question, like when you look back at this journey, what do you think success for you is?
yeah.
Would you say that you've reached a level of success? Are you still on your way? Is success something that is it like a destination, or is it a process? What is it
Yeah.
for you?
I think success isn't a destination, personally. The world has shaped it to look like that. Like, here's the stature or the position you need to reach, the place you need to get to, the amount of wealth you need to accumulate to be considered successful. I don't think that's not how I see it. I don't think that's the way that God sees it, right? And everything that I share will likely be heavily infused with my background as a pastor and as a Christian. So I hope and I believe that's okay. But I think faithfulness is the biggest measure of success, personally.
Faithfulness.
Faithfulness. And not just in the spiritual sense, right? People over spiritualize that word. They say, well, faithfulness is religious. It's what you do in church. It's what you do in quote unquote ministry, right? For me, it's faithfulness to, the calling that God has for my life and my obedience to Him, right? And that goes into every aspect and sphere of my life. That includes my businesses. That includes my family. That includes everything in between, all of that, whether it's, me at church doing something, me at a practice with my child, me out, doing something with my wife, with a friend in the business world, even, if you're out in a hobby or something like that. All of those things tie into, our calling. And for me, it's faithfulness and obedience to the Lord and what He's calling you to do. That's such a challenge for many people, especially, young people. They all want to know their calling. What's my calling? What's my calling? And, they see somebody's success. They see somebody's, not destination, but position or where they are in that particular season. And
Mm-hmm.
they say, well, that's what I want. And that's what I believe is for me. And that's where I want to get to. Right. And it's good to have those, muses or examples or mentors, whatever you may call them, dreams, and somebody to follow. But at the end of the day, the question to me is like, where's that person going to? What's their goal? And like Paul in the scripture, he says, follow me as I follow Christ, right? And because of the fact that he's following the Lord, he can confidently say, look, follow me, and therefore you're going to be following him, right? And that's the ultimate goal. And so for me, it's success is it's not a destination. It's a process that we go through daily. And it's a daily opportunity for us to just say, yes to the call of God. The other thing for me too is that it's impact over income. That's a big thing. Not just building businesses, but building people. I want to be impactful in my life. I want to be influential in my life, and for the glory of God and for a greater purpose. I want to be able to have employees that enjoy where they work. I want to be able to have people around me that are encouraged in my presence, right? And that are not just going to look at my wealth or my stature or my fame or whatever it is. And I'm not saying I have all of those things, just examples, but I don't want people to want to be in my presence because of what I have and what I have accomplished, and because they want that too. I want people to understand that, like, I love them, I care about them, and I care for their best interests, and that I want to sow into them as an individual. And so that's how I see success personally. The other big one that I think everybody would agree with is freedom of time, right? I think that's a big one. There are people that make a lot of money, but they have no time. There are people that are extremely wealthy, but their family relationships are dead. They have no friends, no hobbies. Their health is bad, and they don't have any time for you. And so if somebody called you and they were in need and they said, "Hey, look, I need you to show up for a day, too, and just, care for me," would you have the time to do that, right? And also, for me as a pastor, and where this all kind of started for me, where I pivoted from school into saying, "Hey, I want to go into more full-time ministry," it becomes counterintuitive for me to block out my schedule so much that I don't no longer have time for the Lord, for his presence, for ministry, right, and to serve people. And so that for me is a measure of success, is what I'm building coming alongside, God's purpose and will for my life and helping me to achieve that? Or is it just taking away from it and resulting in this accumulation of something that one day is going to, be a waste ultimately? And the last one is, I want to create businesses that don't depend on me. That's a big measure of success for, I think, specifically in the business world, and not just in that too, actually, because in the ministry as well. If you surround everything around yourself and everybody depends on you, there's no question that can get answered without you. Nobody can make a decision without you. The business or the ministry goes nowhere without you. I don't think that's a good measure of success. It's not about what you've achieved, it's about what you've helped other people achieve. And so I would rather entrust to people and laid out a framework for them and see them grow and prosper. And I can just, enjoy the fruit of our labor rather than just my own, because
Hmm.
then I become a cap on everything. And your business can't grow and your ministry can't grow. And even, it's like a child, like you have to give them freedom sometimes to do things and to make mistakes. And that's the way I prefer to see things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I sometimes have a meeting with some, let's say, a business guy. He's always on his phone. We're starting a conversation, sitting at a coffee shop.
Hmm.
He has to, oh, I gotta answer this. I gotta answer this, and it's like happens over and over. And I'm thinking like this is not the I wouldn't be able to do that. That's kind of ridiculous. That's not what success looks like. That's not how it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
And we're talking about people who have been in quote unquote business for over 10 years, 15 years, and it's still
Yeah.
the same. It's like this, like I need to have control over everything, and not being able to bring in people who you can entrust with,
Hmm.
right? And just let go. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people have health issues and family issues and all those kind of issues, because they think that they're running a business, but in reality they sort of have like I don't know if you know heard that saying where it's like, I thought I went in business, but I just got a like a full-time job that follows me
Everywhere. Yeah.
everywhere I go.
It's a 24/7 job now.
You
Yeah.
know, but on the one thing when we're talking about success not being a destination, when I was younger, no matter how many times I heard somebody older than me say that you think that once you reach that, you're going to be happy. Don't believe that.
Mhm.
That's a lie. But for me, it wouldn't just resonate at that young age. I always thought, like, what are you talking about? Like, no, I'll be happy. I'll feel successful
Mhm.
when I'm over there, when I have that, when I have that, when I live like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It's so hard to understand and grasp that concept that no, that's not what's going to bring you happiness, because it just doesn't.
Yeah, that's very true.
How do you convey this to someone who still like kind of looks at you and it's like, no, I still want that. I still think I'll be much happier when I get
Mm.
there.
Well, for one, they say experience is the best teacher, right? And so you think of a young teenager, right? No matter how many times you tell them, hey, don't touch that, it's going to burn you. It's going to burn you, a young child, and then a teenager, like, hey, I've gone through it. Don't go into this or that. It's going to just cause you trouble, and sometimes they have to go through it themselves, unfortunately. But I think the reality for me is, because I always assimilate and kind of reflect these things into my relationship with God. Because similar to people will say, well, when I get my life together, or when I become have this ministry or that opportunity, then I will feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose. But ultimately, like, what if at the very root of it all, the purpose was not a destination, but it was in a position that we're in, and a proximity that we have to God, and to, because He is the source of life. If we think of Adam and Eve, right, there was a tree of life in the middle of the garden. They lived forever because of it, and they ate of it. Jesus is the tree of life. And so for me, it's that proximity to God that keeps me at bay from saying, hey, look, until I get there, I won't feel like I have success. I won't feel like I am accomplished and fulfilled in life, because then you just go chasing the carrot, right? And every single day there will be a bigger carrot. No matter what car you have, there will always be a nicer car. No matter what house you have, there will always be a nicer car, no, a house. No matter how wealthy you become, there will always be someone more wealthy than you, right? When does that end? I think it's just like, when you're young, you're ambitious, you have these dreams, you see the success of other people around you, and you get that feeling of like, oh, if I can just get there, right? But if young people would truly, invest into what matters, I think in your youth, that's investing into that relationship that you have with God, where you don't have a spouse yet, you don't have kids yet, you don't have all these people that are demanding your time, and you can just be one on one, and find that ultimately, right, Jesus becomes the anchor to your soul. And then it doesn't matter what nice thing, shiny thing comes your way. You can say, well, that's great, and I can afford it, and I'll buy it, right? But that's not going to change who I am. That's not going to bring some kind of satisfaction into my heart and take the place that God ultimately has and belongs to Him. And that you're constantly living in a place of fulfillment and accomplishment, because you're just in the center of the will of God. And I think the primary thing that is the will of God, first and foremost, is that relationship with Him. God's will for every person is proximity to Him, relationship with Him, fellowship with Him. Jesus, when He talked about eternal life, He said, this is eternal life, that you would know the Father and the Son whom He has sent. And when He uses that word know, He talks about intimacy. He talks about intimacy. And so eternal life is where we get fulfillment. And that is truly just to know God, be intimate with God. And out of that comes everything else. That's just, for me, that's the foundation of my life.
So, Vlad, when you're talking about faithfulness, you're talking about things that those who believe will understand.
Hmm.
So, are you saying that for those who don't believe, aren't there some like principles that sort of universally work
Good
in the
question.
world?
Yeah. Every person is made in the image of God, right? Every person. Personally, I believe that there are gifts that come from the Father, from the Son, and from the Holy Spirit. Different types of gifts. The gifts from the Father, they are given to an individual at birth. You probably know people that are not Christians, but they're probably way more generous than 90% of Christians out there, right? You probably know people that don't believe in Jesus, but if you ask them for a place to sleep, they would open up their doors for you instantly, right? Their
Absolutely.
hospitality is
Hmm.
through the roof. And there are people that have natural skills that, like, you can't even teach to somebody, but they're not believers. And so I think naturally, because every person is made in the image of God, we have certain areas where we have these tendencies and skills and abilities that naturally come from God, right? His heart, his character, in some way or form, reflects throughout the earth. You look at all the earth, it testifies of the glory of God. And so I think that there are very, good people out there that have good intentions. And, to them, I would say, hey, look, if you don't feel like, whether God exists or that that's a priority or a pursuit for you in life, maybe it has some place on the back burner and you believe God's out there, but you don't necessarily pursue a personal relationship, to that person, I would say, question what the world is portraying, what in general the world and people in society are being fed and suggested to, as in terms of what is success, what does it mean to have a life of meaning and purpose, and ask yourself, well, is that truly something that needs to have meaning for me? And maybe there's a deeper reason as to why that's being fed to every single person, right? This need for wealth, this need for objective or material
Material,
things, right?
yeah.
This need to be recognized, this need for followers, this need for likes on my post, and if I don't get it, then everything falls apart, right? And if that's what mainstream media is telling you, I would beg to differ and say, well, do I want to be like 99% of people, or do I want to live like the 1%? Not in terms of wealth, but like, do I want my life to be different than all of the people around me, right? And I think there are a few people that you would say, hey, look, I really want to be more like this person, right? But if you gave somebody the right to just randomly pick an individual and say your life is going to look like theirs, you wouldn't be, comfortable taking that bet,
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'd be selective with what I pursue. And it's difficult. I think, in my opinion, it's more difficult to do outside of God because there's a void in the human heart that only He can fill. And most people outside of God, they try to fill it with material things, with bad relationships, with excessive hobbies, all sorts of things out there.
Substances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
substances, and even in the business world with busyness, right?
Yes.
And you can build, 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 but at the end of it, when somewhere down the line, you lose control of that, whether your health is gone or your life ends, right? Or you're just ready to retire, like, what is left other than a number in the bank account, right? And a bunch of buildings that you may own and businesses that will expire at some point, realistically. Maybe not soon, maybe they'll, go generations on, but everything has an expiration date, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's only the eternal things, and that's what only God can provide. And so that's what I think success truly is.
It's interesting when I was hearing you talk about your story, the collision business, and then Arctic elevation. Someone may hear this and say, wow, you're just so lucky. Like you were, at one point supernaturally, God kind of shifted your view where you need to go in life. And then you got this feeling with that project that you made a lot of money on. And then you stepped in, you found this guy who was able to share the way they do business and helped you in the business. Like it just seems like, just luck just follows you. But I'm sure there have been moments where there were some struggles. There's some things that you had to overcome, because I know for a fact, because I'm also in business and a few businesses, and I know that if I just decided that I want to live comfortable
Hmm.
and just be at ease, be very comfortable, then I wouldn't be able to achieve more and grow and develop, and reach new heights. So it is through that adversity, through pain, through failure, that's kind of where we grow. Talk about some of those in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Luck, huh? I mean, I've had people throw that phrase around, right? And it's like, oh well, like they don't even find hope in your testimony, right? And for me, much of my testimony I literally can't share with people because it doesn't make sense to them, right? They can't see a picture of their life where that is applicable to them whatsoever,
Yeah, they're gonna say,
right?
hey, you got lucky. You were just
Yeah.
lucky.
And so for me, the way I see, and this may kind of will bridge into this in a second. For me, I see faithfulness and obedience to God as a feedback loop. It's a big circle, right? God comes to you with a challenge, which realistically can only happen once you're, a saved believer. The first, I suppose, is will you believe in the gospel, right? But thereafter, God comes to you with a challenge, and at some point it becomes clear to you that this is something that God's asking of me. It can be big, it can be small. It usually starts small because we don't have the faith to trust in God for the big things. Like let's be real, if God came to you today and said, "Hey, you're going to one day run a $100 million, business, and you're going to have 300 employees and blah blah," and you don't even have a business yet, you're going to sit there and be like, "Psh, what?" I'd have to be lucky, because oftentimes we don't have the faith for the big things. And so what God has to do, quite literally, is get us to trust in him in the little, and then bigger, 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 right? And so that's how he delegates and entrusts and allows us to steward larger things, because we have to be faithful with little, and then more comes. And so it's a feedback loop. God comes with a challenge. He says, "Hey, look, this is what I have for you. Go and talk to this person. Pray for that person, pursue this venture, right? Invest into this, open up this business, initiate this conversation, that kind of thing. Go to this destination, to this place, this country." And then that it's up to us. God doesn't force you to do it, right? He brings the challenge. We make a decision. Do I respond in faith and say, "Hey, I don't understand this, but I'm going to trust that God's going to do something amazing on the other side," right? I'm going to trust that God has my best interests at heart. And so we make a decision to pursue that and to say yes to the Lord. And what then happens is, because of our response of faith to his calling, in that calling not being in a general sense, but to that one task, that one little thing that he asked you to do, right? God shows up, and he's always faithful. When it's a challenge from the Lord, it's his responsibility to see it through. That's the beauty of this whole feedback loop. And when you involve God in the process, he always shows up, he always comes through, and he's always faithful. And then what happens is God shows up, he does his thing, you see the supernatural outcome, and you go, "Wow, I can trust in him for more now," right? And that's the feedback loop, right? And you've come full circle, and now you're ready for the next task. And so that's what I've seen throughout my life, has been these challenges from God saying, "Hey, look, I know this is beyond you. I know it seems scary. I'm not going to tell you exactly how it's going to happen, how I'm going to do it," right? Sometimes God shows you the destination. Other times he just shows you the next step, but he never shows you both. That's what I've found. It's very rare that God shows you both, where he says, "This is where I'm going to take you, and here's every step that I'm going to take you through to get there," right? And so I would rather focus on the process, because then you don't get let down when you haven't reached your destination yet. It's like, am I changing? Am I growing? Am I trusting in him for more, right? Am I better than I was yesterday in character, right? As a person, as an individual, that's what matters to me. And then when failure comes around, I come back to that and I say, "Well, God, what's the challenge that I'm in right now? What are you trying to teach me? What can I learn from this opportunity," right? I want to trust that you're going to get me out of this. You are the anchor to my soul, my foundation for my life, and I trust that you're going to use this opportunity for something greater, right? And so that for me is kind of the foundation of my approach to most of these things. But with the challenges, for me, prayer, scripture, super important. I come to the Lord with everything. I want his counsel. I want his opinion. All the successes that I've seen in my personal life, and this might not be the case with other people, have been when it has been something from the Lord, and I've just trusted that he's going to do something beautiful out of it. And for me, that's what allows me to take on that risk, because I know that it doesn't all weigh on my shoulders alone. And then from there, when failures come, like, I think ministry has played a big role for me. As a pastor, you counsel a lot of people, right? And when you're in ministry, you're a volunteer. Like, I'm a volunteer at our church. I'm not on staff, but and the responsibility is high, right? And the accountability is high. But when you make a mistake, or when other people make mistakes too, you can't approach them in the way you do in business, right? Can't be like, "Hey, you're fired." Like, well, wait a second, I'm a volunteer here. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what, And so, people say things about you, and you can't just be like, "Hey, well, no, you're wrong," And everybody has an opinion, and I kind of learned in that space how to, the customer service side of things, and how to deal with issues and problems. And sometimes you just say, "Hey, you know what? You're right. I'm wrong. I apologize. I'm going to go home. I'm going to sleep on this," right? I'm not going to overstress about it, because what I've found is those problems, they naturally go away. Uh, and the things that I've created in my mind mentally in the past as big problems have turned out to be very small. You know, for example, in 21, when I was in depression for several months, right? Still a huge amount of wealth sitting in right there, potential, right? All you got to do is hit a button and it's in your bank account. I mean, literally in depression, thinking like, well, did I make the wrong choice? Did I miss the voice of God? This was a mistake. I should have, could have, would have done this if I could go back, right? Just give me another opportunity type of thing. But the reality of the situation was still had a huge amount of wealth, could still walk away from it. Looking back in that moment, it would have still been an ideal opportunity to say, you know what? Let's close this out, take what we've made and walk away, you know? But in the moment, it was this huge, overwhelming weight upon me. I didn't want to even like leave my bed in the mornings. Like quite literally, I lacked purpose in my life. I didn't have motivation to talk to people, to go out for hobbies, the gym, whatever it was, you know. And I had kids too, and so I'd like, you know, get up in the morning and we're just, you know, sitting on the couch and watching stuff. In the back of my mind is always like, man, if only a month ago, if only 2 months ago, you know, if only I had been fasting more and praying more and hearing the voice of God clearer, maybe he would have given me the right point to walk away and to exit. And, you know, I could have had this instead of this, and, you know, could have quite literally retired, you know. And you go through this snowball and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because you keep feeding it. And on the back end, I look back and I'm like, man, I really didn't need to go through all that. And my friends from the outside were counseling me and they're like, "Hey Vlad, like look, you still have more than people even accumulate by the time they retire, you know? You still have a lot of opportunities in front of you and I still think it's a great time for you to just walk away, you know?" And but in my mind that was like it didn't register, you know, until I step back and I can look at it and say, you know, back and say, "Wow, I was kind of foolish and stupid in that moment," you know? And so, but to some extent, I look back and I say, well, you know what? God used this to grow me, to mature me, because now as a pastor, when I see people that are struggling with depression, I can come alongside them and I can minister and serve them and say, you know what? You're not alone. I've been through this, you know?
So when you were getting out of that, was that like a gradual thing, or something happened where you had a conversation with someone, or you were in, praying, and then you just felt like this depression, this feeling left? How did you get out of that?
I think it was a combination, honestly. I had people around me. You know, my wife supported me a lot in that time. You know, the people that knew that I met with weekly ministered to me a lot, and it wasn't even just like let's get together in a huddle and pray and just, you know, fast for this. That was involved, but it was more of just like literally just go out and like get on a small boat and go fishing on a lake, you know. A good friend of mine, Max Yurtson, spent a lot of time with me during that season of my
Mm-hmm.
life, and it's literally what we would do. We would just go to his property. He had a little boat. We'd go and bass fish, and we'd just talk, you know. And he'd pray for me at the end of each meeting, and he'd say, "Vlad, I think you're going to make the right decision," you know. And he wouldn't tell me what to do, but he would just generally share with me, you know, some advice and come alongside me. But yeah, it was that. It was prayer. It was you know, the church, and it was also continuing to move forward in the things that I was doing that I believed in, even though I didn't feel like doing them. Ministry, for example, right? Because in the heat of that moment, in the midst of your, you know, valley and storm, you're forced, in a sense, not forced, but you know that there's something that you're called to do and you have to do, right? And so
It's
let
tough.
me continue to pray for you and for your circumstance and for your breakthrough, even though I'm not, you know, feeling like I can assimilate to it even, you know? And so that's where I think a lot of different seasons God's taken me through. And so now if somebody comes and threatens me with a lawsuit, it's like, hey, we're gonna get through this, you know, because time and time again, what looked like a big problem in that moment turned out to be a small one. Time and time again, things resolved themselves, and they ended up being for my good and for my benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've just seen it, you know, come to that peace and knowing that like until it's a big issue, like an actual problem, I'm not gonna bother wasting my energy and my emotion on overcomplicating things. Sometimes they just play out.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they are just coincidental. Sometimes it's not the devil that's attacking you, right? Sometimes it's your own
Yeah.
laziness and, you know, and the fact that you didn't take the time to train your employee on the values of your business efficiently and they have poor customer service, right? And that's why you have this big issue going on now, right? Some things are in your control, others are completely out of your control.
There's a great book. I don't know if you know David Hawkins, the author. He wrote
Okay.
Power versus Force. he also wrote a book called Letting Go,
Hmm.
and it's on the concept of whatever happens. A lot of people like just they any kind of circumstance or situation that happens to you, most of the time you are the one responsible of making it a big deal because you are going in within your mind to places where it's not a reality, but you're kind of
Hmm.
like coming up with this reality that's not really real, but
Yeah.
and it's all this, but it's a great book. So anyways, it's very, very interesting. So you're married, you have how many kids?
3.
Three kids. You got multiple businesses. A lot of people feel that, man, when you're so busy in business and then you got church and you got family, it's like you have to be somewhere in those three, not quite all there. How do you, is there such thing as balance? Or how do you balance these three or find yourself being able to succeed in all three?
Yeah. I feel like this question is just it's got to be in every podcast interview Q&A out there, right? Even when we do ministry Q&As, always somebody's like, "How do you balance, doing this and that?" And in the past, I'd try to say, "Well, you set time aside and you do this and this." And as I've gotten more and more involved in various aspects of my life, there's no such thing as balance, in my opinion. I really don't think there is. Because there are seasons and times where you have to press into one aspect of your life and something else naturally has to give, right? And so it's kind of like if I want to push the pedal here, I got to kind of release a little bit here. But my solution to that is delegation. I think delegating is huge, and that's where most business people they fail is they don't delegate their work. And so I'm always daily, right? There's a good book called Buying Back Your Time that I'm kind of in the middle of. And that's been opening up my eyes to a reality that in the past I maybe didn't understand. Because, like my dad, for example, he started this business, the shop business, and he grew to the point where he pretty much, he capped out, right? It's usually that 1 million, 1.5 million revenue mark where it's like, hey, you can't get beyond that because everything rests on your shoulders, right? You go on vacation, things slow down without you, and people can't make a decision without you. And so for me, that's kind of what I saw. And when I started to get involved in the business, it was like, Dad, we need to delegate. Like, I need to hire somebody for this role. And it was like, no, 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 we can still do that. I can take care of it. Our body technician can wash the car and detail it at the end, no problem, right? Now we have a full-time detailer, right? But in the beginning, it was difficult because I wanted to pull the trigger on these, and because it was more of a partnership in the beginning, and it still more or less is, but I have much more freedom now than I did in the beginning because I've earned his trust. And so it was like, well, we can still do that. And so we'd hire and delegate, and he's like, oh, wow, that worked. And so now instead of one guy, and that's how it started with myself doing everything, it's like now we have a parts guy and we have an estimator and we have a detailer and so forth, and things are kind of compartmentalized. But in the overall grand scheme of your life, I think delegation is huge, and that's something that I want to continue to pursue, not just in business but in ministry, and even in your personal life. Like, do you need to be mowing your lawn? Like, realistically, just, I mean, some people, they would be on the fence about this. They're like, well, wait a second, that's your house. You should maintain it, take care of it. But you do get to a point where it's like, does it really make sense for me to spend an hour mowing my lawn? Maybe I enjoy it. Maybe
Maybe
it's a
some people,
hobby,
yeah,
right?
some people enjoy
Maybe I
it.
really enjoy seeing that green lawn and that it's the work of my labor, right? But what about your like family? Could that hour be used, to spend with your kids? And if you have that already and you're doing both, that's great. But for me personally, that's what I've seen. It's like, well, wait a second, that's something that I could hand off to somebody else. That it's going to free me to be able to focus on the things that I enjoy, the things that I value, the things that I care about, right? And so there are days where it's like, hey, I gotta preach tonight, and so the business phone has to go earlier than usual, or I got to set up for, we have pastoral meetings on Wednesday mornings, and so that means I got to show up to work later. And if we have family vacations coming up, I got to delegate that to somebody else. And so um, that's the key for me. I,
Hmm.
I don't think there's as much balance, but if you learn to delegate, you can actually accomplish the things that need to get done without you directly having to do it. But that comes with its own challenge of finding the right person that you can trust, that you can teach, and that you can give that responsibility to, and be at peace in knowing that, hey, they're gonna take care of it to the best that they can. Maybe not 100%, but if they
Yeah.
can do it 80%, then it's worth it.
But there's another thing that right now a lot of people are struggling with is they can make time to be home or go somewhere with their kids, but like being present with them.
Mhm.
I see some people hanging out and they're on their gadgets, they're distracted, taking phone calls, all that. Is like, do you have any like a set of like some kind of system where you're like, hey, if I'm hanging out with my family, if I'm completely there, I'm present there, like, do you have some sort of, I know like some people when they started implementing this, where if they have they have a family dinner or they're watching a movie or whatever, like they're putting away their phones in a box somewhere away, and they're only going back to that box when they're done hanging out and they pick up their phone. Like, do you practice any of that?
Yeah. uh, this is probably an area that I personally struggle in. That's something I could definitely be honest about. Um, that there are certain phases where, if your business, for example, it's like a baby in the beginning, right? And so for us, the shop has been maybe almost 2 years into this journey, and it's more established and free to where I can kind of, you know, forward the calls to somebody else and leave. And I know that things get taken care of. Arctic just opened 3 months ago. All the questions come to you. Everybody's getting trained. Everybody's new. Everything kind of rests on you. And even there, I have a manager that manages the facility, and she does amazing. She schedules and does payrolls and all that. But between everything, I still find myself constantly on my phone, constantly responding to emails, constantly there's something urgent that needs my attention, constantly something that's on the back burner. And I even, in terms of delegating, I even found an amazing executive assistant now too. And so I have a to-do list for her. And she's experienced, she knows what she's doing, and I kind of try to push all that over, and still it's like, there's just more and more and more, and so you kind of push it away, and it kind of comes back. And so quite literally, I think that until you make a decision to just say, you know what, like, be comfortable with the fact that certain things will not get done, and that's okay, right? um I don't think there's a way to beat that. You have to understand, like, one thing for me, business phone wise, right? I have a shop phone, for Relux Collision, and when I first opened the shop, I had all of my calls on my personal phone, and so I had two numbers, and the business calls would go there, and all the business texts and all my personal stuff. And I didn't care if you were calling me at 10 o'clock at night, I was picking up the phone, because I was taking every lead, every opportunity. We needed every job possible, and so that's something that I compromised on quite a bit at that point. Now, about maybe 8 months ago, 10 months ago, we got to the point where I said, you know what? 5 o'clock we close. 5 o'clock I stopped picking up the phone. And I don't care if you call me at 5:02, I'm not picking up. And so that was a big step for me personally, to recognize our business hours. I'm not picking up over the weekend. It doesn't matter if you call me with an emergency on Saturday, we're closed, and we will deal with those things on Monday morning.
Hmm.
I don't look at emails over the weekend. I don't care what leads come through. We're not chasing leads over the weekend. My staff is not calling anybody. And some people may disagree with that, and that's okay. But I think in the early stages of my business, maybe there was a bit of justification for it. But as things grow, I began to put that away. And so when I come home, the business phone goes away. Now my personal phone still gets bombarded with a ton of business stuff, right? You still have a little bit of access to everything, and so that's where I try to catch up with things. And but I think for me, I definitely suffer in the area relationally and socially speaking, to kind of put that aside. It's a work in progress
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, same here, and I'm learning right now how to say no
Hmm.
to more things, because before it was like, oh, there's that opportunity and someone's pitching a deal that
Mhm.
you look, it looks very lucrative, you want to partake in that, you want to do this, and yes, I can do that. And then you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, you got all this coming at you. That's because you said yes. You said yes to that. You said yes to that. So now you gotta
Mhm.
have to deal with that. You have these multiple businesses, you're involved in church. What if like next year there's gonna be another opportunity that will come your way? Maybe two opportunities. Like, how do you filter them out and make a decision? Okay, I'm
Mhm.
gonna go with this, I'm not gonna touch this, when or where do you think is going to be like that point where you're going to say, okay, that's enough, I got, this is good enough for me?
That's a good question. I think entrepreneurs uh, are the type to just say yes to a lot of things, right? We're the type to chase every opportunity that seems good, um, and naturally, because of that mentality, I'm very risk on. I'm like, hey, like let's open up another shop. Like that's what I have a business coach now, and that's what we're doing. Through the GRO network, I got connected with a business coach, and so the last few months we've been working on positioning Relux for scaling, and so we want to have about 3 to 4 locations across Sacramento for the shop, and so I'm definitely looking to continue to grow that. Arctic for me was a bit more of a side business, a really cool opportunity, a way to diversify. It's still in its infancy, and I had plans originally to open up an additional location. I don't know what'll happen with that, but at some point you have to make a decision to say when enough is enough. And so the way my wife the other week, and again, my wife always she's kind of like this secondary perspective for me that's so essential. And so she goes, "Hey, well, what if God doesn't want you to open up another business?" Right? And so, because for me, I'm like, well, growth is what we're called to do, right? And naturally, you feel like there's only one direction, and that's up, and that's more, and that's scale, and that's build, right? And she said, well, maybe God doesn't want you, because I believe that there are people out there that are not called to open a business. They're not called to open up a business. They don't have the character for it. They don't have, what it takes, unfortunately. But they'll be an amazing employee, and they may, grow work their way up, and they're satisfied with that too. Like, hey, look, I'm okay with my wage right now, my salary. I'm okay with that. It provides me the freedom that I need to do what I want. I'm okay with my quality of life and the way that I live, and I could care less about what you have and what you've achieved, because for me, I'm living my best life, and I'm enjoying it with my family. I'm in ministry, I'm involved, I feel accomplished, right? And that's completely fine.
But how does someone figure that out before they go through this whole, years and years of trying and burning and then figuring out, oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
business is not for me?
I I I don't know the answer to that one. That's a tough question, honestly. And the easy way out, right? Maybe you'd call it scapegoating, but the easy way out of that question is to say, well, you just gotta be close to the Lord, and hear His voice, and trust that He's gonna bring that confirmation for you. And that's easier said than done as well, because even learning to clearly hear His voice and understand His will and His plans for you takes some maturity, right? And so I don't know the answer to that question,
What
unfortunately.
do you think about like the age for someone
Yeah.
who should seriously start asking these questions and praying that kind of prayer where it's like, hey, I I really want to know what my calling is,
Hmm.
where I need to go in life. Because what I noticed, looking at even like some of my friends, relatives, and people I know, everyone has sort of like their own time, time that they mature, time that they get something. Um, and some people, they can be like somewhere in their 30s and they're still trying to figure out
Hmm.
where to go. For others, it's like, hey, he's 22 years old and man, he's rocking and rolling. Um, so what do you think is that age? Maybe for someone who's like watching this podcast very young,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I don't know an exact statistic for it, but if you look at most of the super wealthy people, they'll tell you they didn't become a millionaire until probably their 40s. That's the reality, right? And we think that there's this impression that you gotta get there as soon as possible. sometimes it's just about when that opportunity will present itself. Um, it's not ever, some people get to extreme wealth extremely quickly. There was an opportunity that was there, they took it, right? And so forth. And you can't force that door to open, unfortunately. You can't force an opportunity to happen. You can position yourself properly for it. And that's what I think most young people need to focus on is positioning yourself. Are you a person of character? Are you a person who has matured? How's your relationship with God, right? Have you experienced what it's like to work with people? Those types of things. And if you do that, I think when the opportunity presents itself, you're ready. But if you seek the opportunity before you yourself are positioned properly for it, it could actually be detrimental to you. It's like taking somebody and putting them in the spotlight too soon, and they're just not ready for that stage, you know? And that's when I look back at my life, that's what I personally see is that God allowed me to go through all of these different seasons and phases of my life in order to position me for the place that He's going to take me to. He positioned me for the doors that have been opened. Before I got into business, I was a bookkeeper, right? I understood the back end of finances. I didn't understand business so much. Before I got into customer service related business, which both of my businesses are extremely heavily customer service based, before I got into that, I was in ministry and I had to very difficult encounters with people where I had to humble myself, admit that I was wrong when I didn't feel like I was, take the fault and move forward. And sometimes that's what you have to do in business too, right? Just hear the person out. Let them express their emotions and their feelings. Let them take it out on you and move on, and don't take it personally. It's not you and it's not the end of the world. And so that's the way that I prefer to look at it. You have to position yourself properly. Focus on who you're becoming, not where you're going. And that's in both, whether you're a believer or not. Um, but in the kingdom of God, I think that's what most people miss is they're trying to get to a destination, they're trying to get somewhere, but they're forgetting about who they are and who they're becoming in the process,
Yes.
right? And it's a journey where transformation takes place over time. And when we stand before God, I think He's going to care more about who you became in this life than what you accomplished in this life, right? Even Paul speaks about that when he talks about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. It's like you can have the most amazing gifts. You can have all knowledge and prophesy
Mm-hmm.
and everything, right? But if you lack love, what meaning does it have? And what that speaks to is character,
Yes.
right? Do you have the heart of the Father? Because that's what matters. Apart from what you've accomplished, some of the most impactful funerals I've been to, people have not talked about what they accomplished in life, how wealthy they were, how many businesses they had. They talked about how they influenced them on a personal level, how they cared about them, how they served them, how they were there for them when nobody else was. I think that speaks for
Absolutely.
itself.
Yes. Yes. Vlad, as we wrap this up, the last question is if there is a chance that a few years later on, your kids grow up, they get to see this podcast,
hmm
what would be like a piece of wisdom that you would want to share?
I would tell them trust the process and take risks. That's what I would say. If you really want to get to a place of meaning and purpose in life, you've got to take the risk. If everybody was willing to take the risk, everybody would, accomplish these things that everybody is looking up to and trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's meaningful risk, and that's in the kingdom of God and that's outside of the kingdom of God. Whether you're a believer or you're not, you have to assess the risk and be willing to take it at some point in time and just trusting the process. When I left school, I thought I was going to be ordained as a pastor literally the next year. I was like, that's it. I'm going to be full-time pastor. I'm not taking and at that time when I left school, right, back then physical therapists were making about 100,000 a year, guaranteed benefits. And I was like, wow, this is great. Nice salary, guaranteed for the rest of my life. As long as you have that license, there's always somebody looking to hire a physical therapist. And then when I left school and where I was, planning on leaving, I said, well, my senior pastor is probably making like 45,000 a year. I doubt my church is going to pay me more than that. My wife was working. She was a cosmetologist at the time. She still is. We're like, okay, well, she'll work too, and we'll live off less and just be happy. And I just trusted that God had our best interests at heart, without knowing that literally a year or two later, He would open up another door that would lead to this extreme wealth that I literally didn't have to work for. Right? I took the risk, and some people call that lucky. I call it faith.
Love it. Well, we can end with that. Thank you so much, Vlad.
Of
Appreciate it.
course, honored to be here.
If you've made it this far and want to support what we're doing, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are committed to making each episode better than the last. If you like this video, here's another one for you to watch. I'll see you in the next one.